Hi, my name's Callie, and for my literature focus unit, I created a unit of study for a first grade class based around the story The Mitten by Jan Brett. This story is the story of a little boy named Nicky, who really wants his grandma to make him a pair of snow white mittens. His grandma doesn't want him to because she's afraid that he's going to lose them in the snow, but she ends up making him a pair of mittens, and Nicky goes out to play, and as soon as he goes outside and starts playing, he drops one of his mittens in the snow. Then what happens is the rest of the story, there's a sequence of animals that come and find the mitten and make it their home. And Jan Brett does a beautiful job of telling the story of the different animals using descriptive language, especially different verbs, to explain how the animals traveled. And at the end of the story, the bear sneezes and all of the animals fly out, the mitten flies, and then the boy finds his mitten. So it's a beautiful story, and it's actually based off of a Ukrainian folktale, and there's many different versions of this story that will be used throughout the unit of study. So the main focus of this literature unit is on sequencing and using sequencing to help with comprehension, and also to use sequencing to retell a story and to write their own narrative. And so there are tons of engaging activities throughout the week that focus on this sequencing. And one of the standards, the reading literature standard that's the focus for this unit, is RL12, which says retell stories including key details and demonstrate understanding of the central message or lesson. And so students will be doing a few different activities where they will actually retell the story of the mitten using the sequencing strategy or comprehension skill. Then also, one of the writing strategies one of the writing standards that is addressed in this study is the first grade standard W13, and it says write narratives in which they recount two or more appropriately sequenced events, including some details regarding what happened, use temporal words to signal event order, and provide some sense of closure. Students at the very end of this lesson will be able to write, or will be required to write, their own version of the mitten, following the same general storyline, but using their own descriptive words to describe their own animals that they choose to make the mitten their home. So a little overview of what the week would look like. This is a 1-week lesson unit plan. And on the first day, the reading stage 1 would be the focus with pre-reading. And students would be building background knowledge about winter, about mittens, and about folk tales also. Students would hear a reading of a poem called Mittens. It's an unknown author, but it gives just an understanding of what mittens are and what they are used for. And then the students will be guided by the teacher through a picture walk of this story, which will help them to begin asking questions and making predictions about what the story is about. Also, the students will be receiving a spelling list for the week, and many of the words in the book will be their spelling words for the week. Also, at the end of this first day, on Monday, the students will get a template where they will get to draw a picture inside of a mitten. And this is based off of the beautiful border that's on each of the pages of this book that give a little snapshot inside a mitten of what's happening. And students will be asked to draw a picture of something that they might need to use mittens for, or a time when they would wear mittens. And this would serve as a way to assess their background knowledge and see if they understand that mittens are used for cold weather, they're nice and cozy and warm, and should be used in the snow. So that's Monday, and then Tuesday would focus on the second reading stage and the third reading stage, which is reading and responding. At the beginning of the lesson, the teacher would review the picture walk very briefly with the students, and then they would do a shared reading experience of the mitten. So the teacher would read through the story, and it would be an interactive read aloud where she would ask questions and engage the students in predicting and making inferences and just critically thinking about the story, using the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy for questioning. And then, as the lesson would go on, the teacher would focus on vocabulary words. And the vocabulary words for to focus on would be the verbs that each of the animals, that describe how the animals are in the story. And for each of those verbs, the teacher would go through them and give a definition and help the students learn how to use context clues and pictures to understand the meaning of these words. There would be a mini lesson on syllables and inflectional endings as a part of that. And then the students would come up with a motion to help them remember the definition of those words. And the words would then be posted on the word wall, which the students will be able to see throughout the rest of the unit. Then on Wednesday, the focus would be on reading stage 4 of responding to the book. And what they would do is this teacher would again read aloud the Mitten book to the students in a shared reading format, but giving students opportunities to choral read with her now that they are more familiar with the text, because it is a little above most of the students' reading levels. So they would reread the Mitten as a class, and the teacher would have, before reading it, the teacher would have given each student their own Mitten that had a picture of an event or an animal on the Mitten. And as they read the story, when their Mitten, the picture on their Mitten, comes up in the story, those students would be asked to stand. And they would come, and some of them will have the same picture, but those students would come, bring the Mitten to the teacher, and the teacher would make a timeline on the board to demonstrate what sequencing is. And as a part of this day, the teacher would also do a mini lesson on sequencing, giving real life examples of the sequence of events that happens before you get ready for school, or other things like that, to help students understand what sequencing is and how sequencing can help with recalling different events in a story. Then what students would do is they would do a guided practice activity where they would create their own timeline of the story, sequencing the events, and the teacher would use the document camera to model this, and then students would be able to do this on their own, and the teacher would slowly give the students more independence so that they would work on it on their own and complete it. And then moving into Thursday, the students would take that graphic organizer and turn it into a storybook. And the students would choose 3 events that they want to do, only 3, that they want to talk about in their event or in their story as a way of retelling the story with some details and using the vocabulary words that they've been learning. And the students would write out their sentences in a book form and would have the option to add pictures to help explain the story and retell the story in their own words. And then on Thursday, the focus of the reading stage focus would be exploring. And so students would have the opportunity to participate in a shared reading of another version of the Mitten by Jim Aylesworth. And this story is very similar. It pretty much just uses different animals and a different sequence of events. And so the students would, again, participate in shared reading and interactive read-alouds with that story. And then the teacher would explain the strategy of a Venn diagram to compare and contrast the different different sequences of events in those 2 stories. And as a form of checking for understanding and practicing writing opinion pieces, which is another standard addressed in this lesson or in this unit, students would do a quick write where they would respond to the question of which version of the Mitten is their favorite or is the best and why, providing details using that the Venn diagram graphic organizer that they created as a class to support their opinion and share why one version is better than another because of the details or the sequence of events that it includes. Finally, on Friday, the focus would be on writing and on applying reading, which is the last of the reading stages. And the students would be beginning a writing activity where they would write their very own version of the Mitten using the sequencing strategy. So they would also get that graphic organizer again that they used to retell the Jan Brett's version of the story. And the students would get to write their own, coming up with 3 to 4, depending on their level. The teacher could differentiate and make adaptations for the different students on their writing, based on their writing and reading abilities. And students would get to write their own narrative focusing on that writing standard of writing narratives with events. And they would be encouraged to use their own verbs, descriptive verbs and adjectives, or words that they've already learned, but apply those to different animals that want to make a mitten their home. And to engage students, they will then get to share their stories orally with some of their peers, because we know that the Mitten was originally a folktale, which is a story that's passed down orally, which is what they'll learn at the beginning. And so it's kind of coming full circle, where students get to use sequencing from reading comprehension all the way to writing their own story, and being able to share that story that they wrote with their peers. So this is a really engaging unit of study, because it works, it applies to all the different areas of literacy. Students will get opportunities to practice phonics, writing, fluency, comprehension, phonemic awareness if they still are struggling with that. There are some pre-teaching activities that I suggest in the unit of study. And what's great about this lesson is it also can be applied to different content areas. So the focus of winter and seasons can be talked about in science. Math can be integrated into math as students use mittens for counting, or they're measuring mittens, and have word problems that include mittens or other winter activities. And then also the focus or the story came from a different culture, and so that can be a part of social studies and learning about different cultures and the setting of the story as well. So there are tons of ways that students are engaged. The lesson is adapted for English language learners through the use of pictures and sentence frames to give them more support that they need to be successful. Checking for understanding activities and assessment strategies are all explained in my hard copy of the unit plan. But I'm excited about this lesson, and I hope that this unit, and then I'm excited that I would possibly get to teach something similar sometime, where I would get to really engage in the theme for an entire week and make it integrated throughout all content areas. And so I hope you have enjoyed this unit of study, and Merry Christmas.